Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and I am just coming on for a few minutes to talk about Bernie's comments on the debate stage about Cuba, and also with the CBS moderators and panel after the debate. It's very disturbing to me that Bernie Sanders keeps calling Cuba a dictatorship and authoritarian regime. I don't think he's ever been to Cuba, but I know that I was, and I ran into Amy Klobuchar there. And quite frankly, this debate was the first time I learned that she actually took my suggestion. Who would have known? I was there on a trip with Code Pink, Women for Peace, in 2015, and we met with Mariela Castro, Raul's daughter, and other members of the National Assembly. And we met with NGOs and artists and activists. And it is not an authoritarian dictatorship. I mean, I'm going to just read to you from Wikipedia a little bit, because it's just disturbing to me that Bernie doesn't, we're electing him, okay? Actually, I don't know if he doesn't know or if he's just saying this to get elected, in which case it's he's not being very authentic, because he knows full well, and he knew in the 80s about these regimes that we overthrew. He knew about how we overthrew Arbenz in Guatemala, how we overthrew Allende in Chile, how we overthrew Mossadegh in Iran, to put in governments that were more favorable to American business interests, because these governments, democratically elected governments, had the temerity to want to control their own resources to benefit their own people. And I know that Bernie understood this in the 80s. So I don't know if he thinks this is too much of a complicated concept to get across to people, or if he's just pandering to the Republican older Cubans who were wealthy, who had to leave Cuba. But those people are going to vote Republican anyway. So it's just concerning to me. So just so you guys know, I just want to read to you a little bit about the official political system there, and then tell you what my impressions were when I was there. So Cuba has had a socialist political system since 1959 based on the one state, one party principle. Cuba is constitutionally defined as a Marxist-Leninist socialist state guided in part by the political ideals of Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin. Despite being regarded as a communist state, the ideology of Jose Marti is what serves as the main source of influence in Cuban politics. The present constitution, which was passed in a 2019 referendum, also describes the role of the Communist Party of Cuba to be the leading force of society and of the state, and as such has the capability of setting national policy. The Constitution also made not only the ideas of Marti, but also those of Castro superior to those of Marxism with regard to influence over the Cuban Communist Party and Cuban society. The most recent leader was Raul Castro, who held the title of First Secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, the most powerful position in Cuba. As of 2019, Miguel Diaz-Canel, who I think we might have met with, but I have to check with Jody and Medea, is now the president of Cuba and is likely to succeed Raul Castro as first secretary in 2021. Executive power is exercised by the government, which is represented by the Council of State and the Council of Ministers. Legislative power is exercised through the unicameral National Assembly of People's Power, which is constituted as the maximum authority of the state. With effect from 2018, Miguel Diaz-Canel is president of the Council of State and president of the Council of Ministers, sometimes referred to as the Prime Minister. The previous president, Raul Castro, brother of former leader Fidel Castro, remains first secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba and commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Armed Forces, kind of like our president. Fidel Castro ruled from 1959 to 2006 before illness forced him to hand power to his brother. Esteban Lazo Hernandez is president of the National Assembly. So you can see there's a lot of elected bodies here. So now the executive power, we talked about, headed by Castro, the Ministry of Interior is the principal organ of state security and control. First Vice President of the Council of State assumes presidential duties upon illness or death. Legislator, there is an elected national legislator, the National Assembly of People's Power, which has 612 members elected every 5 years and holds brief sessions to ratify decisions by the executive branch. The National Assembly convenes twice a year in ordinary periods of sessions. However, it has permanent commissions to look after issues of legislative interest. Among its permanent or temporary commissions are those in charge of issues concerning the economy, sugar industry, industries, transportation, communications, construction, foreign affairs, public health, defense, and interior order. National Assembly also has permanent departments that oversee the work of the commissions, local assemblies of the people's power, international relations, judicial affairs, and the administration. So Article 88 of the Constitution of Cuba, adopted in 1976, provides for citizen proposals of law. Prerequisite that the proposal be made by at least 10,000 citizens who are eligible to vote. It's kind of like somebody getting qualified to be on the ballot here in our country. In 2002, supporters of a movement known as the Varela Project submitted a citizen's proposal of law with 11,000 signatures calling for a national referendum on political and economic reforms. The government response was to collect 8.1 million signatures to request that Cuba's National Assembly enact a constitutional amendment making socialism an unalterable feature of Cuban government. Okay, so I need to look into that. That's footnote 13. I'm going to look into that. But then we go on to the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution is a network of neighborhood organizations across Cuba, and most Cubans are members. The organizations are designed to put medical, educational, and other campaigns into national effect, and this is the iffy part of Cuba, to report counter-revolutionary activity. It is the duty of the CDR officials to know the activities of each person in their respective blocks. So this is the problem that we have with the dissidents and the political prisoners, which is a major issue. Okay, so the national elections for the 612 members of the National Assembly of People's Power are held according to the system and the precepts of the 1976 Constitution. Under the system, neighbors meet to propose the candidates to the municipal assemblies in a public show of hands vote. The candidates do not present a political platform, but only their resumes. The municipal candidates elected in each neighborhood then elect the municipal assembly members. In turn, the municipal assembly members elect the provincial assembly members, who in turn elect the National Assembly members. A direct vote is then cast to decide whether the decanted members that appear in the final step need to be ratified. Okay, so that's the only part I wanted to read to you from Wikipedia. And now I just want to share with you what my impressions were. So my impressions were, even though they have a one state, one party rule, it appeared to me that they had more democracy in Cuba than we have here, because we live in an oligarchy where only the people who have money and power contribute to campaign elected officials seem to be able to influence their elected officials, or special interests. And that would include unions and associations like Charter School Association or the Rifle NRA. You know, so sometimes it doesn't have to be an industry. It could just be association of interest groups. But my opinion was that people in Cuba were so there was a lot more equality. There wasn't the dire poverty that we have here. Everybody had health care. Everybody had education. And as Bernie was trying to say, he increased literacy, Castro, when he first came into power, because the Batista government was a banana republic is what it was. And the Batista government worked hand in hand with the mafia in the United States. And there was a lot of graft and corruption and a lot of inequality in Cuba. And like with all socialist revolutions that have happened around the world, the people legitimately stood up because they couldn't take it. And Castro was very popular. And anyone who knows history knows about the Bay of Pigs, where we sent in an invasion, where we were told we were going to be greeted warmly by the people, and it was an abysmal failure. And then Kennedy decided not to go any further with it. And they were constantly trying to kill Castro. There was the joke about the exploding cigar. But the fact of the matter was he was very popular. And I remember reading in college, now I'm going back 40 years ago, so I'm probably not going to get this all straight, was that in a country where you have so many material needs and you need to get people up to a basic standard of living, sometimes things like civil liberties, like freedom of speech and freedom of the press, those came out of the Enlightenment of middle class revolutions, where once the middle class, had a thriving middle class and they could afford to look at these lofty precepts of democracy, such as free speech and free press, that's when they had it. Whereas when you had revolutions from below, where the working class or the proletariat or the peasants, in the case of China, were so impoverished that you had to sort of suppress these things. And I think this is a continuing feature of these kinds of revolutions. But, it's true. China did lift 800 million people out of extreme poverty. And I haven't studied China as much. I've done a couple of shows on it, but I don't know so much about the political system and how dissidents are treated. We're always told about the human rights violations in China and the Uyghurs. And now they have these re-education camps, which are not concentration camps in the sense that they're being tortured and killed. They are being re-educated. And I, would need to know more about the method of which they're being re-educated before I outright condemn them. Same thing with what's happening in North Korea. But, one thing that's common to North Korea and Cuba is the embargo that we have put on them. Somebody mocked about, I think it was Obama in that quote, where he talks about, I saw that on Twitter, the actual edited remarks at that town hall where he said Cuba has a wonderful education system and a wonderful healthcare system, which they do. And the only thing that Cuba imports, by the way, is doctors. We went to see the medical school where they train the doctors, and the doctors work all over the world. And Nelson Mandela was very happy. And he basically said, Cubans came to our region as doctors, teachers, soldiers, agricultural experts, but never as settlers. They shared the same trenches in the struggle against colonialism, underdevelopment, and apartheid. To Fidel, his enemies call him tyrant, but I saw him send doctors to nations where the democracies only sent bombs. We will never forget this incomparable example of disinterested internationalism, Nelson Mandela. So I thought that was pretty amazing. What we learned about was the Cuban doctors have come up with a way to cure gangrene. They have a medicine that cures gangrene that would prevent amputations. And the reason they can't bring it to the United States is because of the trade embargo. And the trade embargo doesn't just affect trade with the United States, it affects trade with other countries. Any country in Europe, for instance, who wants to trade with us is not allowed to trade with Cuba. So when Obama, in this clip, talked about how they had great education and great healthcare, but the economy was terrible and everybody was poor and they were driving around cars from the 1950s. Hello, that's because of the embargo that we put on them. One good thing about the embargo I noted was that they don't have a lot of internet service there because they wouldn't let Global Crossing, which was the company in the big internet era around the millennial, that would put the wires under the seas. They wouldn't let Global Crossing put the fiber optic network to go to Cuba. So the internet is very patchy there. And what I noticed about not having the internet, first of all, is there's not people walking along the streets looking at their devices all the time like they are here in the United States. They're actually walking and talking to each other and, enjoying each other's company. And there's a lot more socializing and people are out. They're out in restaurants. And back to these municipal and provincial and national government, 3 different levels of government, sort of like our local, state, and federal levels of government. The fact that they've had some loosening up of socialist principles, and they actually allow people to drive taxis and make money, or host people in their house and make money. I actually did not stay in the hotel with the Code Pink people. I wanted to stay in one of those places. I forget the name for it now. but you can rent out a room in your house, or you can also operate a restaurant in your house, or you can drive a cab. And all these different, entities can collect the money. And they collect the money in the dollars, which is actually, problematic because the dollars are worth more than the local currency. But we did go to an agricultural cooperative, and it was interesting for me to note that everybody was not paid the same. They actually paid managers more money than the average worker because of something that I think is human nature. People don't want to work, really hard and make the same amount of money that somebody who's not working as hard makes. So they gave somebody with more responsibility more money. So to me, one thing why I've never considered myself a socialist, I consider myself a democratic socialist, I guess now, is that I've just always been sort of cynical about human nature, about people wanting to be totally equal with people. I think everybody should have their basic needs met. And why I fight neoliberalism is I think that neoliberalism has said for the last 40 years that public goods and services could best be provided by private industry, cheaper, better, and more efficiently. And that's just simply not true. I think public goods and services need to be provided by the government. You need to take the profit motive out of providing the public goods and services. Otherwise, in order to make profit, you're stinting on that public good or service. So you see that they have an excellent, they don't have charter schools in Cuba. They're all government-run schools, and their healthcare is government-run and government-funded, and they're very proud of their doctors. They've never started any war or any aggressive act against any other country in the entire 60 years they've been a country. And like I said, the only reason, like you go there and you see these cars, these American cars from the 50s, kind of like frozen in time, they can't buy cars from here or from any country that sells cars that trades with the United States because of the embargo. So what I found out at the debate tonight was I happened to run in to Amy Klobuchar at the Hotel Nacional in Havana. I was going there to meet a friend from the trip for a mojito. And I happened to see her in the driveway waiting for her car. She was being picked up, and I recognized her. And of course, the first thing I said to her, they were coming over. She was there with a delegation. I forget who the other Congress people were that she was with, and senators, but she was saying that they were, part of the Obama initiative to open up diplomatic relations. They were going to have an embassy there, and she was meeting with people. And that's why she made the favorable comments that she made about Cuba on the stage tonight. I mean, one thing I will say about Amy Klobuchar, I don't agree with her centrist views, but I don't think she panders. I think she does her homework. I believe that she's written 100 bills, and I think she's a workhorse, and she knows the details of things more than probably anybody on that stage. So when she said tonight, because one of the things that I asked her after she talked about how Obama wanted to open up diplomatic relations, I said, what is it going to take to end the embargo on Cuba? That's what we really need. We need to end the embargo on Cuba. So when she said on the stage tonight that she authored a bill to do that, I was quite unaware of that. And I don't, fantasize that I had anything to do with that, but I was gratified that she did do that. And then, of course, when Trump came into office, he completely eliminated whatever progress Obama was making with the diplomatic relations and the embassy and all that, and the travel policy, which was being made more liberal. And it went back to the way that it was. Yeah, so anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It just kind of bothers me that Bernie Sanders talks smack about Cuba. And I'm only hoping that he's doing it to just fit in, go along, get along. But you know what? It's not really in character with the Bernie Sanders that we all know and love, who speaks truth to power and is not afraid to defend, to take the unpopular position, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, when he says that Putin is an autocratic dictator, and I haven't looked a lot into Russia, I didn't even do a show on Russia, but one thing that I do know from having studied the revisionist theory of the Cold War when I was in high school, of all things, I wrote a 12-page paper as a senior in high school about the revisionist theory of the Cold War. Revisionist meaning that it challenged the domino theory that Russia just wanted to take all the countries in the world and turn the whole world communist. Revisionist theory was what they called the sphere of influence theory, that they had been attacked for centuries on their western borders, and they just wanted to have a sphere of influence, which was the communist bloc. So these other areas of the world that we went into, Vietnam, North Korea, these were independent communist revolutions, and the principles of communism were the same, but they weren't guided by or even very much funded by the Soviet Union. And Ho Chi Minh even came over here to try to meet with Roosevelt because he was trying to throw off the yoke of French imperialism, just like the first Kim was trying to throw off the yoke of Japanese imperialism in North Korea. I did a show on that where I completely changed my thoughts about anything that I had ever thought about North Korea because of an article that was written by John Matthew Loritz, and he was on my show. And then I went to a 4-hour forum at UCLA called One Korea, where I learned that South Korea is also controlled by the US. Right now, those 30,000 troops that are there, they cannot ask them to leave. Literally cannot, they won't leave if they ask them, just like Iraq has asked the United States to leave and we won't leave. So this is what we do, okay? And the fact that these debate moderators and reporters are so ignorant of history, of foreign comparative politics, foreign policy, that the only substantive question they can ask is, are you willing to meet with a dictator? Like, it's so juvenile. Of course, Trump should be meeting with Kim. I always get there's 3 names. Kim Jong-un. Trump should be meeting with him. And the reason that our government, and I also used to use the word deep state, but I can't use that anymore because the alt-right has taken it over. But I first heard the term on Bill Moyer's show, and it was called Anatomy of the Deep State. And it was with a former congressional staffer by the name of Mike Lofgren, who called the deep state the military-industrial complex, and now we can add intelligence complex, backed by Wall Street. And this is also the defense industry, both legal arms dealers and illegal arms dealers that profit from there being wars. And the reason that we have ginned up new boogeymen and a new Cold War with Russia and now China is that the war that we were fighting on terrorism, which you can't really have a war on terror because terror is a tactic. Those kind of tactics are fought with guerrilla warfare, urban guerrilla warfare. And in order to fight major countries, you need to have big weapon systems, big expensive bombs and submarines and air carriers, whatever. I'm not even familiar with military weapons, but I know that the kind of weapons that you would be using to fight against major countries like China and Russia are not the kind of weapons that you're using to fight against Al-Qaeda. Mostly they're using drones, I guess. So anyway, I'm very cynical about the whole, Russia gate scare, which I think is a new Cold War that was initiated by the deep state and promoted by the stenographers of the corporate state, like Rachel Maddow and others. And it just bothers me. It bothered me 2 years ago when Bernie Sanders was tweeting out stuff about Russia interfering in our election. And now, of course, they're trying to say that Russia is interfering in the 2020 election, and they're trying to say they're interfering to help Bernie Sanders, which is already being done to delegitimize should he get the nomination. And I think that was even walked back. The intelligence agency that supposedly said this may have even walked it back, but of course nobody's talking about the walk back. They're talking about what was originally said, and Bernie Sanders is, he's decrying it. He's saying, I don't want their help, whatever. So anyway, I suppose I could talk a little bit more about more things, but I just really wanted to come on and talk about Cuba because I thought it was a wonderful country. I thought the people were fantastic and very loving people. One thing I noticed that because they didn't have the internet, they didn't have a big problem with pornography that we have here. And Mariela Castro, who I referenced before, who is Raul Castro's daughter, is a sexologist by profession. So one of the things that she talked about when we met with her is that how sex education in that country is very open, and they teach about relationships in sex education. They teach about emotional intimacy. It's not just about the birds and the bees, how babies are made, how to prevent babies from being made. And what is sad in this country is people are so opposed to that, especially the right wing, that the way kids are educated about sex right now is pornography. And you can get pornography from a very, very young age. It's very impossible. And I know this as a parent, to filter it out of your kids' devices. So you really have to be vigilant to that. If there's any parents watching, you need to have the uncomfortable conversations, talking to your kids about sex, because what they see on porn is not the totality of a sexual relationship. And it's very objectifying and demeaning and even violent to women. And has become a public health epidemic. I mean, I did a show with Gail Dines about this 2 years ago that was very widely viewed. And she left her position as chairman of the sociology department at Wheelock College to devote herself full time to her organization, which used to be called Stop Porn Culture and is now called Culture Reframed. And she's not trying to censor porn. She's just trying to educate people about it. So she goes to schools and talks to them about, how to make kids resilient to some of these images that they're seeing on TV. And, it creates impotence, erectile dysfunction disorder, addiction. And I was just talking to somebody in Nevada. Last night that we were in Nevada, and this person was telling me that, they had a relationship with somebody. And after a point, that person, after the beginning, when it was all new and everything, that person said, "Do you mind if I watch porn?" I mean, that's how it is now, that just to get aroused, that person needed to watch porn while they were having sex with their relatively new girlfriend. And I just think that's really sad. And I'm just so glad that, I did not grow up in that era. But anyway, that's a total digression that I didn't mean to have. So I just want to say this debate was a shit show tonight. I can't even tell you who won. I do think that Pete Buttigieg, he has a very mellifluous voice. He's very calm in the way that he does his delivery. I saw a lot of people on the internet saying that he won. I think he did score some rhetorical points, because sometimes when you get quiet, people listen to you. Sometimes it's better, if you want to be heard, to just get quiet and soft, and rather than shout above everybody. And I know I'm a shouter. So I don't know. I just really feel like it could have been worse. That's all I can say. It could have been worse. I thought the entire thing, and I'm wearing my shirt, Bernie versus Everybody. There was a New York Times article that was titled Everybody versus Bernie, because that's all we thought it was going to be. Joe Lockhart wrote this memo. The Third Way wrote this memo about how all the other candidates needed to go after Bernie, how Bloomberg needed to direct his entire focus on Bernie. And thankfully, the moderators did not let that happen. But the beginning sure was a pylon. I don't think he handled that question about how much it's going to cost very well. I posted on Facebook and Twitter that he should have a banner that's like a poster, like when he goes to speak in the well of Congress and C-SPAN, you always see he has this chart. I mean, I know they probably wouldn't let him bring a chart, but sort of like guerrilla style, he should unfurl a poster and put it down in front of his podium, and then have like maybe 1,000 copies, a flyer of what the poster says, with a simple equation: total cost minus expected savings initial cost minus expected savings equals total cost, to show that the total cost is going to be a lot less than A, what they're saying it is, and B, what we're spending now, and to have better outcomes and everybody covered and have more things included, and have individuals save money on their total health care expenses every year, and have corporations save money on their total expenditures every year. That's what he needs to say. He shouldn't be bringing up some Lancet study. He shouldn't be saying his talking point that he says a million times: healthcare is a right, not a privilege. No, if you only have a few words to say, and this is why Bernie has to get over his aversion to doing debate prep. He needs to practice these answers. You could see how Elizabeth Warren, good little student that she is, she practiced exactly how I'm like, why is she talking about how she was pregnant? And I'm thinking, she didn't even lose her job. That thing was debunked. They didn't ask her to leave. She chose to leave. And that was one of the lies that she was caught in. But why is she bringing up that story in relation to this question? And then I saw where she was going with it. She wanted to do a zinger on Bloomberg about how he said, kill it. When the employee told him she was pregnant, he said, kill it. And of course, he denied it. And then people booed. And I don't know if they were booing her for asking him or not. But all I know is that he paid people to be in that audience. Whether he literally wrote checks to people to be in the audience, which he's been doing, he's been paying Instagram influencers, he's been paying people on social media $1,500 a month to tweet about him, or they were part of his organization, Moms Across America, one of his, or Every Town, whatever that gun control organization he started. He's seeded so many organizations and funded so many candidates that they're all beholden to him. Or they were just Democratic donors, because I understand tickets cost as much as $1,750 to get into that event. So if you're wondering why nobody was clapping for Bernie and why everybody was clapping for Bloomberg and Pete, that's probably why, because those are the two candidates that the billionaires and the wealthy people want to see get this nomination. So I don't think Bloomberg did well again. He tried to make this joke, but it was so lame. Everybody on Twitter really thought, like, did this guy really think he won the debate last time? He's just as deranged as Trump. And I'm like, no, he was trying to make a joke, but his delivery was so lame that it fell flat and nobody got it. Not the audience or not you guys on Twitter. That's what he was. It's like he was practiced. He skipped the town hall last night so he could practice for the debate. So he probably practiced that joke, but he couldn't deliver it well. And at least Bernie, he's humorous. He has a natural sense of humor. I kind of didn't like his quote where he said, everything is impossible until it is done, because that's really not his quote. That's Nina's quote. I've never heard Bernie say that quote. I hear Nina say it all the time. So I don't know. I suggested, let me tell you what I put on Facebook, what I thought would be a good quote for him, because I thought, Amato, somebody who influences him, Amy Klobuchar, said a quote by Paul Wellstone, who is a fantastic progressive from Minnesota, her state. Everybody said, quote, from somebody that they admire. And I have no doubt that, Bernie Sanders admires Nelson Mandela, but I do know for a fact that he had a poster of Eugene Debs, the great socialist, on his wall in his office for decades. So I looked up some quotes, and if I were advising him, which, I've been trying to advise the Sanders campaign for 5 years, but they don't want to listen to me, I would have used this quote. Of course, maybe he didn't know they were going to ask that question, but this is a quote that I feel really sums up Bernie's essence, and that is, while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. And when I read that, that sent shivers up my spine, because it shows that Bernie is the people who he's trying to help. It shows his empathy. It shows his compassion, his true concern for working people and the oppressed. And this is something that there's no candidate on that stage could ever convince you to believe that they have that level of compassion and empathy for working people and the oppressed. Those are politicians who really just want to get elected to advance their career. And as I've always said about Bernie, he's a public servant. He's not a politician. So on that note, I will say goodnight, and we'll keep our fingers crossed about South Carolina. I don't think Joe Biden, did himself any favors. I did think it was kind of cute the way he said, why am I stopping? Nobody else stops. I guess I'm a good little Catholic boy. I thought, he has a genuine likability to him, Joe Biden. I mean, it's unfortunate. He's clearly losing it. Apparently yesterday he said, I'm Joe Biden and I'm running for Senate. And if you don't want to vote for me, you can vote for the other guy. And I think he meant to say guy. Somebody thought he said the other Biden, but I clearly heard the other guy. But I think he meant to say guy. Anyway, so this is the thing that I'm going to be waiting to see, is what happens with the black vote in South Carolina. They were asking him afterwards how much he needed to win by. And he said, I just need to win. This is Joe Biden. You know, obviously it'd be better if I won by more than 1 percentage point, but I just need to win. So that's really going to be the case. I think if Bernie ties with Joe Biden, it will be incredible. If he beats Joe Biden in South Carolina with the black vote, it's going to be all over. I mean, the momentum is going to be just too much to stop. So I am going to be next trying to do a show with my participants from Nevada. We trained up 8 people to be precinct chairs, and they all have interesting stories they're going to report. But then everybody's getting ready for Super Tuesday, which of course is our primary here in California. So keep canvassing, keep phone banking, and keep fighting. And share this video because I'm in Facebook jail.